What if medieval queens were more than just pretty faces in elaborate gowns? What if they were fierce legal eagles shaping the very laws of their kingdoms? From the 6th to the 15th century, these powerful women defied expectations, leaving behind a legacy of groundbreaking legal changes that still resonate today. Number 1. Isabella I of Castile. Reforming the Council of Castile and judicial appointments. Before the reign of Queen Isabella I, the justice system in the many kingdoms that would eventually form a unified Spain was a tangled web. It was a patchwork quilt of local customs, feudal jurisdictions and royal decrees, often contradictory, and rarely uniformly untrust. Noble families held immense power, dispensing justice on their own lands, often influenced by personal gain or long-standing rivalries. Access to fair judgment was a luxury, and royal justice, while theoretically supreme, often lacked the structure and professionalism of the Aristology, the localized power of the aristocracy. The royal council itself, the highest advisory and judicial body, was dominated by high-ranking nobles and clergy, many of whom owed their positions to birth or political alliance, rather than any legal training. They were influential, certainly, but their primary focus was often on advising the monarch on matters of state rather than the rigorous application of law. Appeals were slow, and the path to justice for common people was often murky, blocked by powerful local lords, or simply too expensive and time-consuming to pursue. Lawlessness was not uncommon in the more remote regions, where bandits and powerful magnates alike could act with a degree of impunity. The concept of a unified, professional, and impartial justice system felt like a distant dream for many. Queen Isabella I, alongside King Ferdinand II of Aragon, had a clear vision for a strong and unified Castile. She believed that true royal authority and the prosperity of her subjects rested on a foundation of firm and equitable justice. She had witnessed the chaos of previous reigns, the endless disputes among nobles, and the vulnerability of the common folk. Her determination to bring order and stability to her realm was not just a political ambition. It was deeply personal. She understood that a predictable and just legal system was essential for trade to flourish, for cities to grow, and for the crown to effectively govern. She recognized that the old ways, where justice was often a matter of who you knew or how much land you held, simply would not serve the new powerful monarchy she envisioned. Isabella knew that to truly centralize power and create a cohesive state, she had to reform the very heart of royal administration. The council and the courts. She saw trained legal minds, not just noble birth, as the key to this transformation. The reform championed by Queen Isabella I was nothing short of revolutionary for the judicial landscape of Castile. It involved a deliberate and systematic overhaul of the royal council, transforming it from a gathering of powerful grandees into a highly professional body focused on governance and critically justice. Isabella ensured that the majority of members within the Council of Castile, which became the supreme judicial body of the realm, were no longer primarily nobles or high clergy. Instead, these positions were increasingly filled by letrados, men who possessed extensive university training in Roman law and canon law. These individuals, often from the lesser nobility or common backgrounds, earned their positions through merit and legal expertise, not inherited titles. Their presence shifted the council's focus from political maneuvering to the rigorous application of legal principles. Furthermore, Isabella and Ferdinand established permanent high courts of appeal, known as audiencias and chancillerías. The most prominent of these were established in Valladolid, and later in Granada after its conquest. These institutions were not just extensions of the royal council. They were distinct, professional judicial bodies designed to hear appeals from lower courts and to act as courts of first instance for certain serious crimes or important civil cases. Their existence provided a formal, standardized pathway for justice that bypassed the often corrupt or biased local feudal courts, Cases that had previously been resolved by local lords, or simply languished indefinitely, now had a clear avenue for resolution at the royal level. Process of appointing judges and magistrates to these new courts and to the various local royal corregidors, royal representatives in towns, also underwent a significant change. Isabella insisted on selecting individuals based on their legal qualifications, their integrity, and their demonstrated loyalty to the crown, rather than their noble lineage or personal connections. This shift professionalized the judiciary and began to create a corps of legal professionals who saw themselves as servants of the crown and the law, not just extensions of local power structures. King and Queen themselves were known to personally review judicial appointments and even preside over some of the most important cases, underscoring their commitment to this new system. Royal visits to various regions often included public hearings, where the monarchs heard petitions and complaints directly, further solidifying the perception that justice now emanated directly from the crown. The immediate impact of these reforms was profound and tangible. Justice across Castile began to operate with a greater degree of uniformity and predictability. The professional letrados in the council and the new audiencias applied the law more consistently, reducing the arbitrary nature of previous judgments. Common people who previously had little recourse against powerful lords or inefficient local courts now had access to a professional appeals process. While still imperfect, the system offered a glimmer of hope for fairer outcomes. The authority of the crown in legal matters was significantly bolstered as the power of local feudal lords to dispense justice diminished. The existence of permanent royal courts meant that the crown had a direct hand in upholding law and order throughout the kingdom, fostering a sense of greater security and stability. Merchants and traders benefited from a more predictable legal environment which encouraged economic activity. The reforms also laid the groundwork for a more centralized and effective administration, as the professionalization of the judiciary was a key component of Isabella's broader efforts to modernize the Castilian state. Chronicles of the era recorded that the public's trust in royal justice grew, leading to a greater willingness to bring cases to the royal courts and to obey their verdicts. Number 2. Isabella I of Castile. Establishment of the Santa Hermandad. Before Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II took the throne, the rural areas and many smaller towns of Castile were often hotbeds of lawlessness. The concept of a centralized, effective police force was largely non-existent. Justice was primarily administered at the local level, either by municipal officials, feudal lords, or sometimes powerful local brotherhoods that had sprung up to protect their own interests. These existing systems were often insufficient to deal with the rampant banditry, feuding nobles, and general disorder that plagued the countryside. Roads were dangerous, especially for merchants and pilgrims who were frequently targeted by thieves. Small villages and isolated farms lived in fear of raids. The established judicial authorities struggled to apprehend criminals, and even when arrests were made, the vast distances and the fragmented nature of legal jurisdictions made effective prosecution difficult. Nobles often protected their own unruly vassals, and there was little accountability for crimes committed by those with power. This widespread insecurity hampered trade, disrupted daily life, and undermined any sense of peace and order that the crown wished to cultivate. The lack of an effective enforcement mechanism meant that, even when royal laws were declared, their reach often did not extend beyond the major cities. Queen Isabella I was deeply concerned by the pervasive lawlessness in her kingdom. Having witnessed the turmoil during the civil wars and her own struggle for the throne, she understood that peace and order were fundamental to the stability and prosperity of Castile. She saw the direct impact of rural crime on her subjects, affecting everyone from the peasant farmer whose crops were stolen to the merchant whose goods were plundered. Isabella firmly believed that a strong, unified monarchy required not only a powerful army, but also a mechanism to ensure justice and security in everyday life, reaching into every corner of her realm. She knew that simply issuing decrees from the royal court was not enough. There had to be an effective, swift, and visible force on the ground that could apprehend criminals and bring them to justice. Her determination to create a system that could combat rural crime and protect the common people was a cornerstone of her vision for a well-governed kingdom. She recognized that the existing fragmented local justice systems were failing, and a new centralized approach was needed. The legal reform, championed by Queen Isabella I, to address this widespread lawlessness was the establishment of the Santa Hermandad, or the Holy Brotherhood. This was not simply a new police force. It was a novel legal and judicial institution designed to bring swift justice to the countryside. Established officially in 1476 at the Cortes of Madrigal, the Santa Hermandad was a confederation of municipal forces operating under the direct authority of the crown. It was funded by contributions from the towns and cities that joined it, making it a self-sustaining entity that did not drain the royal treasury in the same way a standing army might. The Hermandad was given broad powers to pursue and apprehend criminals, particularly those involved in banditry, highway robbery, arson, and other offenses that disrupted public order in rural areas. Its agents, often armed mounted patrols, had the authority to cross traditional feudal boundaries in pursuit of suspects. A significant departure from earlier fragmented jurisdictions. Crucially, the Santa Hermandad also possessed its own independent judicial system. Special judges and magistrates, known as alcaldes de la Hermandad, were appointed to hear cases and mete out punishments swiftly. These courts operated with a streamlined process, often bypassing the slower, more complex procedures of traditional royal and feudal courts. Punishments were often severe, including execution by arrow shot for serious offenses, and were carried out publicly, designed to act as a strong deterrent. The Hermandad also maintained an intelligence network gathering information on known criminals and their activities. It established a system of alerts and pursuit that allowed for quick responses to reports of crime. Its jurisdiction extended over all commoners in rural areas, and it even had the power to pursue nobles who committed certain crimes, a direct challenge to the traditional impunity of the aristocracy. The Queen's personal commitment to the Hermandad was evident. She provided it with royal charters and supported its establishment and operations throughout the kingdom, making it a cornerstone of her efforts to restore order. Its effectiveness was seen as a direct reflection of the crown's power and its dedication to protecting its subjects. The immediate impact of the Santa Hermandad was dramatic. Countryside, which had long been plagued by insecurity, experienced a notable reduction in banditry and rural crime. Travelers could move with greater safety, and trade routes became more secure, fostering economic activity. The swift and often harsh justice dispensed by the Hermandad courts instilled fear among criminals and acted as a powerful deterrent. Chroniclers of the period noted a palpable improvement in public order and a growing sense of security among the common people. The Hermandad's ability to operate across feudal boundaries also significantly undermined the power of local lords who had previously acted with relative impunity or harbored criminals. It served as a visible and constant reminder of the crown's authority, extending royal justice into areas where it had previously been weak or non-existent. The establishment of the Santa Hermandad was seen as a direct expression of the monarch's determination to protect their subjects and assert their control over the entire realm, bringing a new era of relative peace to the rural areas of Castile. Number 3. Berengaria of Castile, championing municipal fueros. In the medieval kingdoms of Iberia, before queens like Berengaria took the stage, the relationship between growing urban centers and the traditional power of feudal lords was a constant source of legal friction. Towns and cities, often founded or refounded during the Reconquista, had been granted special legal charters known as fueros. These fueros were comprehensive legal documents that outlined the rights and duties of town-specific legal procedures for their courts and often granted them significant autonomy from the surrounding feudal nobility. They were precious instruments, representing the hard-won liberties and economic privileges of urban communities. However, these fueros were constantly under threat. Powerful feudal lords, eager to expand their own authority and revenues, frequently attempted to infringe upon municipal liberties. They might demand illegal taxes, interfere with town elections, assert jurisdiction over townspeople for crimes committed outside city walls, or challenge the right of towns to maintain their own militias. King, often preoccupied with wars or internal political struggles, could not always intervene effectively to protect these urban rights, leaving towns to fend for themselves against formidable noble power. The result was often legal disputes, armed clashes, and a general state of instability that hindered urban development and weakened the royal authority that had originally granted these charters. Queen Berengaria of Castile, despite her relatively brief time as a queen regnant before she abdicated in favor of her son, Ferdinand III, held a deep appreciation for the importance of the urban centers and their unique legal traditions. She had been raised in a context where cities were vital for royal power, serving as bases of support against rebellious nobles and as sources of revenue and skilled craftsmen. She understood that the fueros were not merely historical documents, but living expressions of municipal identity and economic vitality. Berengaria recognized that protecting these charters was not just about defending abstract legal principles. It was about ensuring the loyalty of the towns, fostering trade, and maintaining a stable base of support for the crown. She had seen firsthand how unchecked noble power could destabilize the kingdom, and she viewed the fortified and self-governing cities as crucial bulwarks. Against such disorder, her commitment to upholding the legal integrity of these fueros stemmed from her strategic vision for a strong and unified Castile under royal authority, recognizing the cities as indispensable allies in that endeavor. The legal reform championed by Queen Berengaria centered on the staunch defense and reaffirmation of the fueros of Castilian towns and cities. While she did not create new fueros on a grand scale, her significant contribution lay in her unwavering political and legal support for the municipalities against the encroachments of powerful feudal lords. During her regency and brief reign, she actively intervened in legal disputes where noblemen attempted to undermine the rights granted by royal charters. She used the authority of the crown to arbitrate in favor of the towns, reinforcing the legal precedents set by previous monarchs who had granted these liberties. Berengaria's approach was practical and direct. When a city or town presented a grievance against a noble who was violating their fuero, she would ensure that the royal court took up the case and, crucially, that the verdict upheld the municipal charter. This involved sending royal judges or representatives to investigate claims, listening to petitions from town councils, and issuing royal decrees that explicitly reiterated and protected the specific clauses of the fueros. She also ensured that newly granted fueros or revisions of existing ones were meticulously documented and officially sanctioned, providing an undeniable legal basis for urban autonomy. Her legal and political backing provided a crucial shield for the towns, which, though strong, often lacked the direct military power to resist a determined feudal lord on their own. By championing the fueros, she was asserting the supreme authority of the crown as the ultimate guarantor of justice and legal rights, overriding the claims of lesser local powers. Her actions sent a clear message across the kingdom. The legal privileges of the towns enshrined in their fueros were under the direct protection of the monarchy. The immediate impact of Berengaria's unwavering support for the municipal fueros was a significant strengthening of the town's legal and political standing. Cities and their inhabitants felt a renewed sense of security regarding their hard-won liberties. They were better able to resist the illegal demands and jurisdictional claims of neighboring feudal lords, knowing they had the backing of the queen. This fostered a period of increased stability and growth for many urban centers as their economic activities could proceed with less fear of arbitrary interference. The clear reaffirmation of royal authority as the ultimate arbiter of justice over local noble power was also a crucial outcome. It reinforced the idea that the crown was the ultimate source of law and protection, thereby strengthening the central monarchy against the fragmented power of the aristocracy. Chroniclers from the period might have noted an increased willingness of towns to send representatives to royal assemblies and a greater sense of loyalty to the Castilian crown. Seeing Berengaria as a protector of their cherished rights, the legal landscape became clearer in favor of urban autonomy, setting a precedent that would continue to shape the relationship between the crown, the nobility, and the cities for generations. Number 4. Eleanor of Castile. Protection of Jewish communities and debt collection. In 13th century England, the Jewish community occupied a peculiar and often precarious legal position. They were technically considered direct subjects of the king, often referred to as chattel of the king, meaning they were under his immediate protection and jurisdiction, separate from the feudal system that governed most of the population. This special status provided some protection from local lords, but it also made them vulnerable to royal exploitation. Jewish communities were vital to the English economy, serving as moneylenders at a time when Christian law prohibited usury, providing essential capital for various ventures, including royal projects. However, their role as creditors often made them deeply unpopular. With the populace and many nobles who were frequently in debt to them, anti-Jewish sentiment was widespread, fueled by religious prejudice and economic resentment. Royal policy towards Jews fluctuated. At times, kings protected them as valuable assets. At other times, they exploited them through heavy taxation, forced conversions, or, as would eventually happen, expulsion. Legal disputes involving Jews, especially those concerning debts, were complex. Debtors often tried to avoid repayment, sometimes using legal loopholes or inciting mob violence against Jewish creditors to escape their obligations. The legal framework for debt collection was often weak, making it difficult for Jewish lenders to recover what was owed to them without constant royal intervention. This created an environment of instability and risk for the Jewish community. Queen Eleanor of Castile, wife of King Edward I, had extensive personal financial dealings, and her approach to these matters, including her interactions with the Jewish community, was pragmatic and often direct. She was known to borrow from Jewish moneylenders, and crucially, she also held many Jewish debts that had been assigned to her by the crown or other creditors. Her involvement in these financial arrangements gave her a unique insight into the challenges faced by Jewish lenders attempting to recover their money. Unlike some who viewed Jews solely as a source of royal revenue, Eleanor understood the practical necessity of a functional credit system and the need for legal mechanisms to ensure that debts, once incurred, were repaid. Her experience navigating the complex financial landscape of the realm, combined with her powerful position, made her a significant figure in the legal aspects of debt collection, particularly as it related to Jewish creditors. She believed that upholding the sanctity of financial agreements was essential for order and stability, regardless of the creditor's background. The legal reform championed by Queen Eleanor of Castile, though perhaps not a grand, sweeping statute, involved a consistent and influential intervention in the enforcement of Jewish debt collection. While the overall royal policy towards Jews under Edward I became increasingly restrictive, Eleanor's personal actions and direct influence within the royal court often provided a crucial layer of legal protection for Jewish moneylenders in specific instances. She used her unique position and access to the king to ensure that cases involving Jewish creditors received timely and effective resolution. Eleanor frequently petitioned the king or intervened directly with royal officials to compel defaulting debtors to repay their Jewish creditors. This was not a passive role. She actively pursued legal actions to recover debts owed to Jewish lenders, especially when those debts had been assigned to her. She used royal warrants and writs to demand payment, seize assets, and sometimes even imprison recalcitrant debtors until their obligations were met. Her consistent enforcement of these legal instruments set a precedent for royal intervention in such cases, demonstrating that the crown would, at least in certain circumstances, uphold the validity of Jewish loans. while royal policy could be punitive towards Jews. Overall, Eleanor's actions provided a practical legal pathway for them to secure their economic interests within the existing framework. Her influence ensured that the royal courts and administrators paid attention to these often contentious cases, making it harder for debtors to simply ignore their obligations. She also ensured that in the event of death, the estates of debtors were properly managed to satisfy their debts to Jewish lenders. The immediate impact of Queen Eleanor's actions was a greater degree of predictability and enforcement in the recovery of debts owed to Jewish moneylenders. For a community that faced constant economic precarity and legal challenges, Eleanor's direct intervention provided a powerful, if sometimes inconsistent, shield. Debtors, knowing that the Queen herself might intervene, were sometimes more inclined to fulfill their obligations. This created a slightly more stable financial environment for Jewish lenders, allowing them to continue their vital, though unpopular role in the economy. Consistent application of royal power in these specific debt cases also reinforced the Crown's ultimate authority over financial matters, even those involving segments of society often marginalized. While it did not prevent the eventual expulsion of Jews from England, Eleanor's specific legal interventions provided a practical means of justice and economic stability, showing that even within a hostile environment, powerful individuals could champion specific legal outcomes. Number 5. Philippa of Hainaut. Intercession for pardons and mitigation of harsh sentences. In 14th century England, the justice system was often severe, with a wide range of crimes carrying the death penalty, mutilation, or other extremely harsh punishments. Juries, while present, were often pressured or prone to local biases. Prisons were notoriously brutal, serving more as holding pens before trial or execution than as places of rehabilitation. Due process, while conceptually present, could be a fragile thing, easily overshadowed by the power of local lords, royal officials, or the sheer lack of resources. The king, as the fount of all justice, held the ultimate power of mercy, capable of granting pardons or commuting sentences. However, gaining access to the monarch to plead for such clemency was incredibly difficult for ordinary people. Many who were unjustly accused or who committed minor offenses faced disproportionately cruel fates. The system was prone to rigidity, and without an avenue for mercy, individuals could easily find themselves trapped in a cycle of irreversible punishment, sometimes for acts committed out of desperation or in self-defense. The concept of compassionate justice was often secondary to the need for deterrence and the upholding of royal authority through fear. Queen Philippa of Hainaut, wife of King Edward III, was widely renowned for her compassion, piety, and practical approach to governance. Unlike some queens who focused solely on political maneuvering or grand ceremonies, Philippa was known to be keenly aware of the suffering of the common people. She was often approached by individuals and families pleading for mercy, for loved ones condemned by the harsh legal system. Her own experience as a mother and a woman of deep faith instilled in her a strong desire to alleviate unnecessary suffering and to ensure that justice, while firm, was also tempered with compassion. She understood that while law needed to be upheld, there were circumstances where an unyielding application of the rules could lead to profound injustice. Her reputation for kindness and her consistent advocacy for those in distress made her a natural patron for individuals seeking clemency. She saw it as a moral duty to intervene on behalf of the less fortunate, using her unique position as queen to influence the course of royal justice. The legal reform championed by Queen Philippa of Hainaut was less about creating new statutes and more about establishing a consistent practice of royal intercession that mitigated the severity of the prevailing justice system. Philippa became a tireless advocate for pardons and the commutation of harsh sentences, effectively creating a reliable, albeit informal, channel for mercy within the English legal framework. Individuals, families, and even communities would petition her directly, presenting their cases for clemency. She would carefully consider these appeals, and when convinced of their merit, she would personally approach King Edward III to plead on behalf of the condemned. Her influence with the king was immense, and her pleas were rarely disregarded. She used her persuasive power to secure royal pardons for a wide range of offenses, from minor thefts committed out of desperation to more serious crimes, where the accused had acted in self-defense or where there were mitigating circumstances. She also interceded for those who faced the death penalty, convincing the king to commute their sentences to imprisonment, exile, or fines. Her efforts were not limited to a few isolated cases. Historical records show a consistent pattern of her involvement in such matters over decades. By consistently acting as a conduit for appeals for mercy, Philippa effectively institutionalized a pathway for compassion within the royal justice system. While royal pardons were always the king's prerogative, Philippa's consistent advocacy ensured that this power was exercised more frequently and often in favor of those who might otherwise have faced an unyielding fate. Her actions served as a counterbalance to the often rigid application of common law. The immediate impact of Queen Philippa's championing of pardons and mitigated sentences was a tangible lessening of the severity of punishment for many individuals throughout England. For those who received her intercession, it meant the difference between life and death, or freedom and continued suffering. Her actions provided a crucial safety net for the vulnerable, offering a glimmer of hope in a system that could be unforgiving. It also fostered a perception among the common people that the monarchy, through the Queen, possessed a compassionate side, making the royal government appear more humane and accessible. While not a formal change in law, her consistent intervention created a practical avenue for clemency that became an expected part of the royal justice process. Her reputation as a benevolent queen, willing to listen to the pleas of the condemned, led to countless individuals seeking her help, and her success rate in securing pardons was remarkable. This practice effectively softened the edges of a harsh legal system, demonstrating that mercy could indeed play a significant role in royal justice. Number 6. Blanche of Castile. Strengthening royal justice and appeals through the Parlement de Paris. In 13th century France, before the full consolidation of royal power, the administration of justice was a complex and fragmented affair. While the king was theoretically the supreme judge, actual legal authority was often distributed among numerous feudal lords. Each lord maintained his own courts, applying his own customs, and often rendering judgments based on personal interest rather than a universal standard of justice. This led to a patchwork of legal practices across the kingdom with little consistency or uniformity. Access to royal justice was limited, often slow, and only truly effective for the powerful, or those with direct access to the king. For the common person, disputing the Lord's judgment was a daunting task, requiring significant resources and perseverance. Appeals were often difficult, sometimes involving travel to the king's itinerant court or direct petitioning that could be ignored. The concept of a formal, centralized, and professional court of appeal that could consistently review and overturn arbitrary local judgments was still developing. This decentralization of justice meant that the king's authority, while growing, was not always effectively felt in the daily lives of his subjects, and noble power often went unchecked in legal matters. Queen Blanche of Castile, acting as regent for her young son Louis IX, faced numerous challenges to royal authority, including powerful feudal lords who sought to undermine the crown. She was a shrewd and determined ruler, deeply committed to strengthening the monarchy and ensuring internal peace. Blanche understood that a unified kingdom required a unified system of justice, one that transcended the localized power of the nobility. She knew that simply issuing royal edicts was not enough. There needed to be a clear, accessible, and authoritative channel through which royal justice could be administered, and through which appeals could be heard. She recognized that the king's court, then still an informal gathering, needed to evolve into a more structured professional body to effectively enforce royal law and provide equitable judgment. Her vision was to make the king's justice paramount, available to everyone, and powerful enough to override the often biased judgments of feudal courts. The legal reform championed by Queen Blanche of Castile, centered on the significant institutional development and strengthening of the Parlement de Paris. While the Parlement had existed in nascent forms as a part of the king's itinerant court, Blanche's regency saw its transformation into a more permanent, professional, and preeminent judicial body. She understood that a strong and accessible royal court of appeals was crucial to consolidating royal power and ensuring justice across the kingdom. Blanche took decisive steps to formalize the Parlement's structure and functions. She ensured that sessions of the Parlement were held regularly and for longer periods, no longer solely dependent on the king's travels. She actively encouraged the hearing of appeals from feudal and ecclesiastical courts across France, establishing the Parlement as the ultimate court of appeal for all subjects. Crucially, she began the process of professionalizing its membership. While noblemen still held positions, Blanche ensured that an increasing number of trained jurists, known as legistes or gens du roi, king's men, were appointed to the Parlement. These individuals, knowledgeable in Roman law and canon law, brought a new level of legal expertise and impartiality to its proceedings. They were dedicated to upholding royal law and providing consistent, rational judgments. Blanche herself often presided over sessions of the Parlement, demonstrating the personal commitment of the crown to its work. She encouraged subjects, regardless of their social standing, to bring their cases to the Royal Court of Appeal, promising fair hearings. Her strong backing meant that the Parlement's decisions were respected and enforced, even when they went against the interests of powerful feudal lords. By making the Parlement de Paris the central pillar of royal justice, Blanche was effectively curtailing the arbitrary power of local lords and establishing a uniform legal standard throughout the royal domain. The immediate impact of Blanche of Castile's efforts was a profound centralization of justice under royal authority. Parlement de Paris became the undisputed Supreme Court of France, a fixed point of legal authority that offered a predictable and professional avenue for appeals. This meant that the king's justice was no longer a distant ideal, but an accessible reality for more people. Individuals who felt they had received unfair judgments in local feudal courts now had a clear, albeit challenging, path to appeal to the crown. Professionalization of the Parlement members led to more consistent and legally sound judgments, reducing the arbitrary nature of justice that had plagued earlier periods. Power of feudal lords to dispense justice unchecked was significantly diminished, as their decisions could now be overturned by the royal court. This fostered a greater sense of legal uniformity and royal sovereignty across the kingdom. Chroniclers of the time might have observed an increased flow of petitions and appeals to Paris, signaling a growing trust in the royal legal system and a weakening of local jurisdictions in favor of centralized power. Number 7. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Advocacy for dower rights and women's property inheritance. In the medieval period, particularly during the 12th century, the legal position of women, especially regarding property, was often precarious. While feudal law recognized a woman's right to dower, a portion of her husband's estate, usually 1/3, allocated for her support upon his death, securing and maintaining this right was a constant struggle. Powerful male relatives, whether the deceased husband's kin or the woman's own, often tried to seize or diminish her dower lands. Widows frequently found themselves embroiled in complex and lengthy legal battles to protect their inheritance. Furthermore, a woman's ability to inherit property directly, especially in her own right as an heiress, was frequently challenged by male claimants. While daughters could sometimes inherit in the absence of sons, their rights were often weaker, and they faced immense pressure to marry quickly, effectively transferring control of their inheritance to their husbands. The legal system, largely designed by and for men, offered limited recourse for women to assert their property rights independently. Cases involving dower and female inheritance were common, highlighting a systemic vulnerability for women in controlling their economic future. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and independently minded women of the medieval era, had a deeply personal connection to the legal challenges surrounding dower and female inheritance. She was a grand heiress in her own right, inheriting the vast Duchy of Aquitaine, a territory larger than the King of France's domain. Her life was defined by the complexities of controlling her own lands and navigating multiple marriages, each with its own legal implications. For her property, she fiercely defended her ducal rights, even against her husbands, Louis VII of France and Henry II of England. Her own experience with powerful men trying to assert control over her lands, and her eventual imprisonment by Henry II, made her keenly aware of how vulnerable women's property rights could be even for someone of her immense stature. Her consistent legal battles and her strategic use of feudal law to protect her own interests made her a living embodiment of the struggle for female property rights. She understood that defending dower and inheritance was not just about individual women. It was about upholding the legal principles of feudal tenure itself. The legal reform championed by Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, though not codified in a single grand statute, manifested as a consistent and powerful advocacy for women's dower rights and their right to inherit property, particularly within the Anglo-Norman and Plantagenet legal systems. Eleanor used her immense personal authority, political influence, and deep knowledge of feudal law to ensure that these rights were upheld, both for herself and for other women who sought her patronage. She frequently intervened in legal disputes involving dower, ensuring that widows received the portion of their husbands' lands and revenues legally due to them. When she presided over her own courts in Aquitaine, or influenced the royal courts of England during her regencies or periods of influence, she often ruled in favor of women, seeking to protect their inheritance. Her own meticulous defense of her Aquitanian lands often, through shrewd legal maneuvering and appeals to customary law, set a powerful precedent for other noblewomen. She demonstrated how a woman could use the existing legal framework, however imperfect, to assert her claims against powerful male relatives or royal interference. Eleanor's constant pressure on her sons, especially Richard I and John during their reigns, to respect her dower and her rights as a feudal lady, further cemented the legal importance of these claims. She would often mediate disputes between other noble families, where a woman's inheritance was at stake, leaning her considerable influence towards upholding their legitimate claims. She was known to be a patron of women, seeking justice in the royal courts, providing them with access and support. The immediate impact of Eleanor of Aquitaine's unwavering advocacy was a tangible strengthening of women's legal position regarding dower and inheritance within the English and Aquitanian feudal systems. Her consistent support made it more difficult for male relatives to arbitrarily dispossess widows or deny heiresses their due. The royal courts under her influence, or during her regencies, became more reliable venues for women seeking to enforce these rights. Her own example as a powerful independent landholder who consistently defended her property provided a powerful precedent for other aristocratic women and indirectly influenced a broader understanding of female property rights. While challenges persisted, Eleanor's long and influential career ensured that the legal mechanisms for dower and inheritance were more consistently applied and respected. Chroniclers of the period noted her formidable legal acumen and her dedication to upholding the rights of her sex, ensuring that her legacy included a subtle but profound influence on the legal landscape. Number 8. Empress Theodora. Legislation against forced prostitution. In the Byzantine Empire of the 6th century, the legal and social landscape for women, particularly those in vulnerable positions, was often grim. Forced prostitution was a pervasive and often tacitly accepted reality, especially in the larger cities like Constantinople. Many young girls and women, particularly those from impoverished families, were sold into brothels by their parents, relatives, or unscrupulous traders. These individuals often had no legal recourse, trapped in a system that deprived them of their freedom and dignity. The existing laws were inadequate to address the systematic nature of this exploitation. While there might have been some regulations around brothels, they did not effectively protect the victims. The authorities often turned a blind eye to the coarse nature of the trade, viewing it as an unavoidable consequence of poverty or necessary evil. The lack of proper legal protections meant that these women were essentially without rights, their bodies and futures controlled by their owners or procurers, with little hope of escape or justice. Empress Theodora, the formidable and influential wife of Emperor Justinian I, had a deeply personal and profound understanding of the plight of women trapped in forced prostitution. Her own background was unconventional, with some historical accounts suggesting she may have worked as an actress or performer in her youth, a profession that often blurred lines with prostitution. This personal history, combined with her sharp intellect and fierce will, ignited in her a powerful desire to protect and elevate women, especially those on the margins of society. Theodora believed that such exploitation was a profound injustice and an affront to human dignity. She understood that simply condemning the practice was not enough. It required direct, forceful legal intervention to dismantle the systems that perpetuate. Her commitment to this cause was not merely an act of charity, but a determined effort to reform the legal framework that failed to protect these vulnerable individuals. She saw it as a cornerstone of a just and moral society. The legal reform championed by Empress Theodora was a groundbreaking set of laws directly targeting and effectively abolishing forced prostitution within the Byzantine Empire. Using her immense influence over Emperor Justinian, who admired and respected her intelligence, Theodora pushed for legislative changes that had a profound impact on the lives of countless women. One of the most significant aspects of this reform was the prohibition of forcing women into brothels and the outlawing of selling young girls and women for such purposes. This was a direct legal challenge to a practice that had been implicitly tolerated for centuries. Theodora's laws were not just prohibitory. They also established practical mechanisms for rescue and rehabilitation. She mandated the closure of brothels where forced prostitution was practiced and ordered the release of women held against their will. Furthermore, she ensured that these freed women were not simply cast out onto the streets, but were provided with support and resources for a new life. She established and funded institutions, often convents or hospices, where these women could find refuge, receive care, and learn new skills, allowing them to reintegrate into society with dignity. Theodora also introduced harsher penalties for procurers and those who exploited women in this manner, raising the legal stakes for engaging in such activities. Her determination ensured that these laws were not just words on parchment, but were actively enforced throughout the empire, setting a new legal standard for the protection of vulnerable women. Her personal involvement and unwavering commitment ensured that the imperial apparatus took these reforms seriously. The immediate impact of Empress Theodora's legislation was a significant reduction in forced prostitution and the liberation of many women from servitude. Brothels that engaged in these practices were shut down, and the trafficking of women for coerced sexual labor became a much riskier and less pervasive enterprise. Thousands of women who had been trapped in horrific circumstances found refuge and a new beginning in the institutions established by Theodora. This reform dramatically improved the legal standing and safety of vulnerable women in the Byzantine Empire, offering them a level of protection previously unimaginable. It sent a clear message that the state would no longer tolerate such exploitation and that the human dignity of these women was to be upheld. Chroniclers of the era recorded the widespread positive effects of these laws, noting how they brought a new sense of hope and security to the most marginalized women in Byzantine society and set a powerful precedent for state intervention in matters of human rights and dignity.